John was a simple fisherman who spent his days at sea. One day, while he was fishing, a thick fog suddenly descended, making it impossible for him to see anything. Lost and confused, he wandered around in the fog for what felt like hours. As he was beginning to lose hope, he spotted what appeared to be a deserted ship in the distance. Hope surged through him. Maybe he could ask the ship's crew for help, or maybe he could even use their boat to signal for help. John steered his boat towards the mysterious ship and tied it up alongside. He then carefully made his way onto the deck, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. As he explored further, he noticed that the ship was eerily silent. There was no sign of life anywhere. John found a ladder leading up to the deck and started to climb. As he reached the top, he noticed that the ship was completely empty. It almost felt like the crew had vanished into thin air. But it wasn't just the absence of people that was strange. Everything on the ship seemed normal, almost as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment. Food was laid out on the table, clothes were neatly arranged, and there were clear signs that someone had been there recently. He went to the control room to try to contact the Coast Guard, but the radio was broken. The ship's engine was also dead, which made it even more puzzling. Why would a crew abandon a perfectly good ship? Sitting in the control room, staring out at the endless ocean, John couldn't shake off the feeling that he wasn't alone. It was then that he noticed a pair of binoculars on the control table. He picked them up and looked around. The fog had cleared and the sun was shining, but they revealed nothing. All he saw was a vast expanse of water, empty and inviting. He sighed and lowered the binoculars. The weight of his isolation pressed down on him. The vastness of the sea around him seemed to mock his predicament. With no way to contact the outside world and no crew in sight, he was truly alone. Just then, an idea struck him. He would send out a distress call over the radio. Maybe someone would hear his plea for help. Grabbing the radio, he quickly composed himself and sent out a message. "Mayday, Mayday, this is John from the Sea Wolf. I am stranded on an abandoned ship. Please send help." He waited anxiously for a response, but there was only static. Disheartened, he put down the radio and went out to look for his boat. He remembered tying it securely to the ship's railing before coming on board. But when he got there, his boat was nowhere to be seen. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. John was in a panic. He searched the deck frantically, but his boat was gone. Just then, he noticed something odd. The fog was starting to come back. It was creeping in from the horizon, blanketing the sea in a thick white haze. With a sinking heart, John realized that he was in grave danger. He was alone on a deserted ship in the middle of a foggy ocean, with no way to contact the outside world and no way to get back to shore. Suddenly, he remembered the ship's engine. Maybe he could fix it and use it to signal for help. With renewed determination, he went back to the control room and started working on the engine. Hours passed and the fog thickened. Still, John didn't give up. Finally, he heard the engine sputter and then roar to life. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. No one responded to his radio calls. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the engine died again, leaving him stranded once more. Feeling desperate, John made his way to the rear of the ship. He needed to use the toilet urgently. As he stood there, he felt a shove from behind. He lost his balance and stumbled forward. In that moment of chaos, he reached out for support, catching hold of a rope, but it was too weak and snapped under his weight. John fell into the churning waters below. Struggling to keep his head above the water, he reached out for a lifeline. His fingers brushed against a rope ladder hanging from the side of the ship. With a surge of adrenaline, he grabbed the ladder and pulled himself up. But as he climbed, someone pushed him again. Shocked and scared, he lost his grip and dangled precariously from the ladder. With a final burst of strength, he hauled himself onto the deck and scrambled to safety. Breathless and shaken, he turned to see who had tried to push him off the ship. But there was no one there. Then he noticed the toilet door. It was slightly ajar. He hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Was he really alone on this ship? Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. But before he could do anything, the door slammed shut and locked with a resounding thud. John pounded on the door, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Hello, is anyone there?" But there was no response, only the sound of his own voice. Alone in a dark room, John desperately knocked on the door, but no one answered. Suddenly he heard footsteps near the door and banged on it again. "Whoever you are, open the door! I am not a thief!" he shouted. But no one replied. Fearing they would call the police and accuse him of trespassing, John decided to slip out the door and escape. He moved quietly down a long corridor, keeping close to the wall. Suddenly, his foot hit something hard, and as he leaned closer to investigate, he saw bloodstains on the floor. Startled by the horrifying sight, he quickly tried to wipe it off, but it wouldn't budge. Just then, the ship lurched violently, throwing him off balance. John instantly regretted leaving the cabin. He knew this ship like the back of his hand and could navigate it in the dark without a sound. But now his ears were ringing, and every bang and crash made him jump. Then he remembered seeing a window in one of the storage rooms nearby. With newfound determination, he stumbled toward it, ignoring the crashing noises. As he looked out the window, he saw a massive cargo ship plowing through the waves directly toward him. "Oh God," he whispered, realizing he was trapped. Taking a deep breath, John took off his shirt and waved it frantically. Maybe if someone saw him, they would slow down or change course. But no one seemed to notice him. As he watched in horror, the cargo ship continued its relentless approach. Thinking fast, John grabbed a rope and slid it under the door. If he could just tie it to something solid, maybe he could stop the vessel. But when he pulled it tight, it got caught in the engine and wrapped tightly around his neck. John struggled to free himself from the tightening grip of the rope, but it only made things worse. He could feel himself choking, and his heart raced with fear as the cargo ship loomed closer. Somehow, just as the vessel rammed into his ship and everything went black, he managed to free himself from the rope. When John regained consciousness, he found himself face down in the water. Confused, he turned his head and saw the cargo ship blocking the view of the others. His own ship was rapidly filling with water, and a strange feeling washed over him. As he looked around, he noticed that it wasn't salty seawater, but fresh, clean water that was gushing in. Instinctively, he knew someone was messing with him, deliberately trying to terrify him. Struggling to swim against the current, he reached the opening where the cargo ship had crashed into his vessel. Peeking inside, he saw that the water had started receding, revealing a gaping hole in the side of the ship. To his horror, the water that had filled his ship had turned salty, meaning the other ships had finally noticed him and were pumping out the water. That night, a violent storm struck, and John huddled in the corner of the deck, bracing for impact. Waves crashed over him, and suddenly the ship lurched violently. He watched in disbelief as the ship he had called home for so long began to break apart. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a calm, cloudless sky. John awoke to the sound of waves lapping against his face. He opened his eyes to see the water had risen up to his head. But just as despair began to set in, he heard the faint sound of a door clicking open. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, he turned the handle. The door burst open and John was pulled out onto the deck. Gasping for breath, he looked around and saw that no one was paying any attention to him. Shaking with cold and exhaustion, he tried to stand up, but his legs felt weak and wobbly. Slowly, he began to walk toward the bow of the ship, and after what felt like an eternity, he collapsed on the deck. As he lay there, he could hear the sounds of the ship creaking and groaning around him. He knew he had survived the ordeal, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that something else was out there, watching him, waiting for him to make a move. An unseen force seemed to be haunting him, refusing to let him go. Despite his exhaustion, John knew he had to get help. Summoning the last of his strength, he stumbled off the ship and onto the dock. People stared at him as he walked past them, but he didn't care. All he could think about was getting away from that ship. As he looked back, he saw the faint outline of the ship against the morning sun, and he shuddered. Whatever had been haunting him on that ship was still out there, and he knew he would never be free of it. Just then, he heard the voice over the radio. "Attention, survivors. We repeat, survivors of the Crimson Sea, this is the captain speaking. We're coming for you." Moments later, he saw an upward passage. Taking a deep breath, he jumped up and ran towards it. But when he touched the ladder, it disappeared along with the entire opening. Once again, he was trapped. Sitting down on the ground, he felt completely defeated. In a panic, he grabbed a nearby wrench and smashed it on the floor. "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" As if in answer, the light flickered and went out, plunging him into total darkness. We've said this before and we'll say it again, the ocean is unforgiving. And for the crew of the Crimson Sea, the disaster that unfolded was nothing short of a nightmare. The ship, once a symbol of luxury and adventure, became a floating tomb. Today, we will delve into the harrowing tale of survival and the desperate measures taken by the sole survivor, John, who found himself stranded on the ocean. But before we dive into this chilling narrative, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Let's begin. After endless hours adrift at sea, John had almost lost all hope of being rescued. His body was battered, his spirit broken. Suddenly, a miracle occurred. He spotted a massive cargo ship in the distance. With renewed determination, he waved frantically, hoping to attract their attention. But as the cargo ship drew closer, it veered away, oblivious to his plight. Desperation surged through him as he realized he might be doomed to die alone on this cursed vessel. Meanwhile, back at the Crimson Sea, rescue operations were in full swing. Teams of divers were sent in to search for survivors, but they returned empty-handed. The Crimson Sea was a ghost, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had struck. Days turned into weeks, and the world mourned the loss of the Crimson Sea and its passengers. But amidst the sorrow, there was a glimmer of hope. Reports surfaced of a lone survivor who had managed to escape the sinking ship. But how did he survive? What became of him? Where is he now? All these questions swirled around the world, capturing the public's imagination. Was the survivor haunted by the ghosts of his past? How did he cope with the trauma of losing everyone he knew and loved? Or did he find solace in the arms of his family and friends? We may never know the answers to these questions because the truth is that what happened to him remains a mystery to this day. Let us know in the comments if you want us to make a part 2 of this story. We eagerly await your feedback. Thank you for watching. The rhythmic crash of waves against the hull was the only sound in the unnerving silence. John's heart pounded against his ribs, echoing the relentless beat of the waves. Now the oxygen in the space was thinning. Breathing became harder. The room below was locked. He had nowhere left to go. He thought this might be his final moment, but then he heard that same eerie click. Suddenly, the vent creaked open. Without wasting a second, John pulled himself out, gasping as the fresh air filled his lungs. Outside, he saw the ship moving toward a small island. Hope flickered within him. Maybe now he could finally be free from this cursed vessel. As soon as the ship touched shore, he leapt off. He believed someone on this island must be behind all this. Grabbing a stick in anger, he began searching the island. But soon he froze in shock. The island was completely deserted. Not a single trace of human life. Rage and fear surged through him again. As he walked back out, he saw something that chilled his soul. The same cursed ship was now calmly drifting away into the quiet sea, as if hunting for its next victim. John now knew for certain. The ship and this island were under the grip of some dark force. He had to escape, no matter what. He climbed to the highest peak of the island, and from there spotted another island far away. But it was too distant to make out what was happening there. As he roamed the island, he slowly found himself circling back to where he'd started. And when he reached that point, his eyes went wide in disbelief. It was the exact same place where his journey had begun. His old boat was tied there, exactly as before. The same people, the same surroundings, unchanged, as if nothing had ever happened. Everything was perfectly normal, like none of it had occurred. John stood frozen, staring. He couldn't comprehend whether this was real or a nightmare. But what he had endured felt terrifyingly real. And yet one question gnawed at him. How had his boat returned here? What was the true nature of this island? When John circled back once more, he found the same place again. The same boat, the same people. As if time itself had reset. He could no longer tell if this was reality or a monstrous dream. But everything he had suffered felt undeniable. A sudden commotion broke through the tranquil scene, pulling John's attention towards the source. A group of men were racing toward his boat, their faces etched with urgency. As they reached the boat, one of them, presumably the leader, turned, catching sight of John. Recognition dawned on his face, quickly replaced by a chilling accusation. "You!" he spat, his voice thick with animosity. "You were the one who destroyed our island." John recoiled as if struck, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." The man's eyes narrowed, his gaze boring into John's. "Don't play dumb with me," he snarled, advancing menacingly. "We know it was you who unleashed the chaos on our island. You will pay for what you have done." Before John could utter a word in protest, the man and his companion surged forward, their hands reaching for John. Adrenaline surged through John's veins, propelling him into action. In a desperate bid to escape their clutches, he dove into the sea. The icy water enveloped him, sending a jolt of pain through his limbs. But he didn't have the luxury of dwelling on the pain. The race was on. With the burning sensation of shame and fear propelling him forward, John swam with all his might. The island, with its menacing shadows and accusing whispers, receded into the distance. Behind him, the shouts of the pursuing men faded into the roar of the waves. But John knew they wouldn't give up easily. He risked a glance over his shoulder and his blood ran cold. The men were on their boat, their angry faces illuminated by the eerie glow of the rising moon. They were gaining on him. John's heart hammered against his ribs, each thud echoing the urgency of his situation. But there was no one to hear his silent scream, no one to witness his terror. He was utterly alone in his battle against the relentless forces of the night. And as the darkness closed in around him, he knew that if he didn't summon every ounce of strength within him, he might just become another victim of the sinister island's haunting embrace.